Hey everybody, welcome to Dad's Den of Pop Culture. We are in the month of October, so I'm trying to focus my videos on things that are spooky and Halloweeny and all that good stuff. And so obviously, that means the mighty Thor. Now hold on a second, true believers. I know you're thinking, what does Thor have to do with horror, really? Well, I mean, other than maybe Hela. Well, these comics, Thor number 332 and 333, pit the mighty Thor against Dracula, the Prince of Darkness. Now, the first thing you think when you're looking at Thor versus Dracula, if you're a comic book fan, is that, man, Dracula is going to be way outclassed on this one. I mean, Thor is, cosmic level superhero. Not the toughest character in the Marvel universe, but I mean he's operating at a very high level. So how do they make this work? Or do they make this work? Well, let's take a look. All right. Lock and Chase for Intellivision. Almost got it in television when I was a kid, but opted for the VIC-20 instead. Okay, so the mighty Thor, Blood of a Goddess. Written by Alan Zelenetz or Zelenetz, penciler Don Perlin, inker Vince Coletta, Janice Chang, letterer, George Russos, colorist, Mark Grunwald, editor, Jim Shooter, editor-in-chief. So this is the Shooter years. So this is the point where Thor had moved his base of operations to Chicago. I don't know if it was we're in June of '83, by the way. So I don't know if that was a sort of a dictate from Marvel to try to spread the heroes away from New York City a little bit. But because you were also getting like Spider-Woman in San Francisco, She-Hulk was in LA. But for a while, Thor was working in Chicago. And so this is part of a larger storyline that involved the disappearance of Jane Foster. So here we see Dr. Donald Blake getting ready to shoot Jane Foster, in the head. Wait a minute, what? No. Because what we're really looking at is a Chicago police detective who is weaving that story to Dr. Donald Blake because Jane Foster has disappeared. Now, I'm not going to get into that overall storyline. They talk about it a little bit here. But essentially, Jane Foster was dying. Sif sort of joined her essence with Jane Foster to save her, kind of the same way Thor and Donald Blake are connected. But what ultimately happened is Jane Foster sort of disappears from existence. What do we got? Marvel Supermart. The Winged Warrior hat. Don't laugh, man. Freddie Mercury wore one of those. No, he wore one with Viking irons. Yeah. We got Bubble Yum, which was one of the superior bubble gums of the day. All right. So anyways, the problem that Donald Blake obviously has is he can't reveal to this detective what he knows because he'd have to reveal that he was Thor. And so this whole period has Sif trying to live on Earth with Thor as a normal person. Because Thor refuses to leave Midgard. He's Earth's protector. He's going to stay. And it's not working out that great. She's having trouble fitting in. She doesn't really, frankly, like being on Earth. She prefers Asgard, and I suppose you could understand why she would. And so here we see her. She's out shopping, for some clothes. 'Tis difficult pretending to be immortal, for my spirits cannot abide the snail's pace of humans here on Midgard. Still, Thor will be cheered that I have acquired earthly fashions in order to play the role of Donald Blake's cousin, Sybil. And so in the meantime, she sees a mom buttoning up her kids, and one of them walks in front of a car, which Sif stops really just by laying hands on it. 'Cause I don't know if you know this, but she's a goddess, and she's really tough. And so, she sees the newspaper where he's being quizzed about this nurse's disappearance back in New York. So we have Thor. He jaunts home to Avengers Mansion, and to, basically back to New York to see if he can figure something out because he doesn't understand why she's disappeared either. Exactly. And he knows that it has to do with this rune staff that was used to save her. So he goes to find the rune staff. It's not at the hospital anymore. He talks to Captain Marvel and Star Fox at Avengers Mansion. And could you, help me find this thing? And sure, if, we see it. Which, this could be sort of an error. I mean, Captain Marvel can turn into light. Conceivably, she could probably cover all of New York City. Like, search everywhere within, like, a couple of hours, maybe, at the speed of light. But she doesn't. Meanwhile, so he goes back to Chicago because he doesn't really get any real help there. But meanwhile, in Chicago, a most extraordinary ceremony is being conducted at this ordinary-looking apartment house, with chants of Dracula, 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 and old Drac pops up out of his coffin. Yes, my children, your prayers have been answered. Dracula, your lord and master, walks among you this night. Your faith in the ritual has been rewarded. With each passing night my power grows. Soon I shall truly be immortal, and on that day all of humanity will bow down before me. Assuming none of the 4,000 Marvel superheroes will stop me. So Dracula has been called by this cult, this Dracula cult that apparently is all over the country or the world, and he's appeared in Chicago. And so he turns into a bat to go out and look for some eats. Thor returns home to Sif. They chat. They're trying, to make all this work, and Dracula flies by as a bat. What power does the Prince of Darkness sense below? Meanwhile, a bunch of kids, teenagers, are heading home from, I think maybe it was from school. Yeah, all-night yearbook meetings. Okay, so they're heading home, and there's this weird fog. One of them's dropped off at home. The other three head on, and they run smack dab into Dracula. And what do we got here? Comic book and science fiction film conventions. Boston, March 5th and 6th. Oh, John Byrne, John Romita Jr., and Jimmy Doohan. Nice. Oakland, California. Klaus Janson. All right. See, this was, these, you kind of make fun of these pages, but this was the internet for comic book fans of the day. This is where you found things. New Brooklyn Comic Shop. Marvels and DCs from 1940 to 1983. Silver Star Comics. 3554 Nostrand Avenue. All right. It'd be kind of fun to look that up and see what it is now. Well, you look up stuff from old 40s magazines, addresses, and a lot of times the buildings don't exist anymore. So these kids are now tracked down by Dracula, who does what Dracula does, and he attacks them. And so these kids wind up in the morgue. Here we get back to our detective who was investigating Thor. He runs into Donald Blake, who's at the hospital. And I wish I could get this lighting a little better. Kind of washing stuff out on the second page. Let me move that over a little bit. So Donald Blake runs into this guy who's already suspicious of him. And they take a look. I'll hold this up a little bit. They take a look and can see the bite marks. What do you make of these neck wounds, Dr. Blake? 3 neighborhood kids came in like this, and there's a 4th unidentified man we've got in the freezer. Cause of death, severe loss of blood. It's always funny in these things where people, like, can't quite figure out the very obvious signs of a vampire attack. You know, it's like, are there no vampire movies to be found in these fictional worlds? So Thor turns into, or Donald Blake turns into Thor, and he's going to go find what's going on. And meanwhile, Drax, snoozing out in the coffin. And he knows he's discovered a goddess. And he says, ooh, I want to get a hold of that. And so the next night, while Thor is out doing his thing, he runs into the vampires. And so here we have this detective taking on a vampire who kind of looks just almost a little bit like Barnabas. Then 'tis true, those neck wounds Donald Blake saw were of a vampire. Dead thou wert once, and dead again shalt thou be, demon. So what do we got? We got a saving certificate on Marvel subscriptions. Join the Galactic Legions. What do we got? Star Frontiers. Yeah. Latest, greatest science fiction. Yeah, I guess Gamma World was science fiction, so it would be latest, greatest. So Thor uses Mjolnir, which is technically a religious symbol. And when Mjolnir smacks into a vampire, that vampire is gone. And so now we fast forward to a cemetery. This character, Pulowski, appears in an earlier comic, working with a character called the Crusader, who is sort of this overzealous, Crusader knight who fights Thor. So this is Pulowski making a second appearance. He was working in the graveyard then as well when he got roped into being with the Crusader. So we have these kids rise from the grave as vampires. And so Thor goes after them. And obviously, again, Thor is more than powerful enough to deal with these characters. This is easy for him. And we see him taking them on in flight. And one of them is getting away, and Thor just launches Mjolnir and takes it out in midair. And so at this point they think, okay, well, that's over with. I mean, the 4 bodies we had have already risen as vampires, and we've taken them out. But Thor's troubles aren't over yet, because while Sif sleeps, Dracula creeps in. Oh, what happens next? Well, let's find out what happens next. Hey, it's big bubble blowing time. Fantastic Four bubble gum. Okay, that's an awesome, pack. That looks like the ones that were like Big League Chew. I wonder if those are sitting around on eBay somewhere. So here's Dracula, and yes, my ravishing goddess, now you are mine. So in the next issue, the Prince of Asgard versus the Prince of Darkness. Now look at this. One by one, the West Coast super people have disappeared. Who's next? Find out in Spider-Woman. Very nice. Okay, and we got a Tron ad. And of course, prizes are cash from Olympic. And on the back, Tutankhamun. No, wait. Tutankhamun. The home video game you've waited 3,000 years for. It's probably not true. All right, so the question of how is Dracula going to successfully take on the Thunder God, we sort of get the answer. He has drank the blood of a goddess and turned her into a vampire at Dracula's command. Look at Thor. No, Sif, no. The Mighty Thor, like a bat out of heaven. Same creative team on this one. Dracula bids you awaken, my goddess. And nice work on Sif here. She's rather buxom and rather beautiful here. So while this is happening in Thor's or Donald Blake's apartment, Sif is borne off on leathern wings, leaving the familiar apartment of her mortal host. While he's doing that, Thor has traveled back to New York to talk with Doctor Strange. So here, he thinks the vampire thing is done with. And so he's back on the Jane Foster case. We got to find this rune staff. And so Doctor Strange is going to use his amulet to probe Thor's consciousness to see if he can figure out where this thing is. Some great Doctor Strange stuff here. And he's stunned. By the eternal Vishanti, your soul. Forgive me, Thor. I had momentarily forgotten the power of an immortal soul in turmoil. And so he goes in, and again, so we get a little bit of a recap of what's going on of this false accusation. And so at this point, Doctor Strange actually now knows Thor's secret identity. You seek to preserve the integrity of your Donald Blake identity by locating the rune staff, which was lost, and with it, hopefully recovering Jane Foster. Aye, now you know the Thunder God's secret. Believe me, Thor, your identity is safe with me. If it would make you feel more secure, though, I could cast a spell of self-forgetfulness upon myself. Nay, Stephen Strange, you are a comrade in arms. I trust you. Thor's cool like that. He's cool like that. And so they go in, they're doing their spells, and they get some more information about the rune staff and where it might be. It's on some other world. Yada, yada, yada. And Stephen Strange kind of detects something strange. An aura of malevolence surrounding Sif. Right? Because he's delving into her mind. Thor, what do you know of vampires? This very night, before I came to you, I myself slew 4 of the foul creatures. Why? This is bad. Very bad. The goddess Sif has been touched by a vampire. And by the degree of power I perceive, it could only be Dracula, the vampire lord. Sif in the clutches of a vampire? Holy mackerel. So Thor heads back to Chicago with all speed, gets into the apartment. She's not there. Elsewhere in a Chicago apartment, Sif now is basically under the control of Dracula. And, thinks he's her lord, her love, etc. And Dracula is finding that having her blood in his veins has made him significantly more powerful. And so he decides, hey, let's go out on the town, and gives her this gown. Thor arrives at the police, station, and he needs some leads on where the vampires might be. And this detective does have a lead for him. And so Thor goes a-looking for Dracula. But of course, Dracula isn't there. He gets into a fight with a mortal, one of the Satanists who has summoned Dracula. And meanwhile, at the Chicago Opera House, Dracula and Sif are watching Wagner's Tannhauser. And she's now got the vestigial little fangs here. So she's becoming a vampire. Oh, check that out. Cobra is looking for a few bad men. G.I. Joe is looking for a few good men. Coming soon, G.I. Joe video game from Parker Brothers. So Thor arrives at the opera house. And you gotta love it, dude. This would be fun in a movie. He's just right in the middle of this opera house, and he's yelling, "Dracula, Prince of Darkness, Thor of Asgard, has come for his goddess." And she's kind of got amnesia. She doesn't know who this is. And so Drac turns into a bat and attacks. But again, he's got some god power now. And so he ain't going down. Because Thor's like, Mjolnir, this will take this dude down. No problem. And we got some more ads. And it doesn't work. And so then Dracula makes a genius move. He summons forth, a storm. Kind of forgetting he's dealing with the thunder god. So as the storm is raging, these two titans are fighting. And that light, I think, is actually washing it out a little bit. But I'm still trying to get this set up quite right. So they're fighting, and then Dracula summons rats. So you got Thor like in this giant, pile of rats, which he takes care of pretty easily. And the problem Dracula's having is that his power is starting to fade. So here we have him throw Mjolnir. Dracula turns into a mist, to avoid the hammer. But, he says, "Again, your mallet." I'm sorry, I'm not doing my Dracula voice. "Again, your mallet. You're a greater fool than I would have imagined. Have you forgotten so soon my metamorphosis to cloudy mist? Nay, that is just what I desire, for his transformation requires concentration, forcing him to yield control of the storm. Now, lightning, strike. Strike the very mist, which is Dracula." And boom! Aye, spack, spack. That is the sound of lightning striking Dracula when he's in his mist form. And so that takes him down quite a peg. And then Sif appears as Dracula disappears. "To hella with the what?" So Stephen Strange appears. "Do not be puzzled. Members of a Chicago Dracula cult have mystically transported their master to New York. Sif's blood, which he had hoped would make him immortal, has been rejected by the ichor in his veins. He is weak enough that I can monitor him. I will complete the task you have begun next month in Doctor Strange number 60. You, meanwhile, are free to find the rune staff you so desperately seek. May you be successful." And so Sif shows up, and so I like this. I like this shot. Let me see if I can bring this a little bit closer. We see Sif appear behind Thor, and she looks a little, a little dark, a little mysterious. Is she a vampire? Well, I don't know, but what we do know is we have a D&D adventure, and that's Bill Willingham's arts, I believe. It is Willingham. I'm pretty sure of that. No, Sif is okay. And she remembers Thor now, and huggy, huggy, lovey, lovey. And now they have to go find the rune staff located on Camo Tharn's planet far out in space. And so what we ultimately get here is a sort of little Thor side quest with Dracula. But I think they did a pretty nice job of finding a way that you could make it a real fight between the two. And in the meantime, they are advancing the storyline with Jane Foster, her disappearance, and how it's tied to Sif and the rune staff. And, this is a period where the Tomb of Dracula comic was over. But Marvel wasn't done with Dracula. And obviously, he's showing up here. I believe he also showed up in the X-Men. There's a reference in here, I think, to the X-Men. and then he's going to show up in Doctor Strange. So sometimes, and I don't know if this is the case here, sometimes they would have a storyline playing out when the comic sales were bad enough that they had to cancel the comic. And they would find a way to continue the storyline in other comic books just to wrap it up. So that might be what they were doing here with Dracula. This is 83. The monster revival of the 70s was winding down. And we were moving, in terms of horror, into the period of Jason, Michael Myers, Freddy Krueger, and things of that nature. So, the Dracula sales probably flagged, and it was time to bring in, get rid of Dracula. But it looks like Marvel still wanted to keep him alive. So here we go. The Mighty Thor, 332, 333. An interesting bit of storytelling and figuring out a way to make Dracula a match, even temporarily, for Thor. And it's a good instance of, Thor having to use some, strategy and tactics here to defeat Dracula, instead of sticking with the traditional bash them with Mjolnir. So hopefully you enjoyed taking a look at these two comics. And if you did, please hit like, please hit subscribe, please share with your friends. Maybe they're unaware of this era of the Mighty Thor, because it was going to get a lot crazier soon enough with the classic Simonson run that got all Asgardian with everything. So there we go. That's our episode for today. I hope you enjoyed it. God bless everybody. Please be kind to one another, and try to have some fun out there, and I will see you again soon in Dad's Den of Pop Culture.